Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar for this afternoon. It promises to be a very interesting, important, and engaging webinar. This is Mercedes Byrne-Klug at the University of Iowa, and I'd like to welcome you to today's session and remind people that the handouts for today's session are on our website. You can just Google University of Iowa School of Social Work and follow the links to the nursing home resource page, or you can just Google National Nursing Home Social Work Network, and it'll take you right to the handouts. And so this last part here is where you can find the handouts. We have 2 handouts for today, a summary of the presentation in 6 slides per page, and then also a resource list that was provided by our speakers. Those of you who are joining us live today, we will be emailing you a certificate of attendance during the next week, and in that certificate of attendance, we include your name exactly as you listed it when you registered, and then we also document the number of minutes that you were with us online. There's no cost for the certificate, and in some states that'll help you towards CEUs, but not in all states, I'm sorry to say. Recording today's session, so if you are not able to join us for the whole time, if you have to leave for whatever reason, please know that the recording will be posted by Saturday. I will be posting this one and be available to the public. We're going to have a webinar that lasts about an hour and 15 minutes. Our speakers will present for about 55 minutes, and then the last 15 minutes we're going to devote to hearing from you. So please type in your questions or your comments in the Q&A box. You're also welcome to send a message to me, your host, in that box if you would like. I'd like to turn the microphone over to my colleague, Bob Connolly, social worker with 20 years of experience at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And in fact, Bob was the project officer for MDS 3.0, so he's very familiar with the work that you're doing. And he's co-leader of this webinar series. So, Bob?
Smurf, I'm really excited today because we have 2 leaders and great social workers who are going to be speaking with us. As we've been planning this, we've found a network of really quality people who are willing to help you, who are working at the bedside and helping our nursing home patients and residents nationally. The topic for today is very important to all of us: early through advanced dementia, roles for social work with person and family transitions. Our first speaker is Lisa Gwyther. Lisa is a certified social worker with 40 years of experience working with individuals with dementia and families. She is an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Duke School of Medicine and founder and director of the Duke Family Support Program and education director of the Bryant Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at Duke. She was honored in 1998 as the founder of the National Alzheimer's Association and was past president of the Gerontological Society of America. She's a distinguished social work practitioner of the National Academies of Practice and a producer of a national award-winning documentary on Alzheimer's care. So you can see she's really very experienced and helpful on our topic. She has produced 2 popular books, Caring for People with Alzheimer's Disease, a manual for facility staff, published in 1985 and republished in 2001, the Alzheimer's Action Plan, a family guide, produced in 2009. Wyatt has been working in the field of long-term care since 1973, when she worked in Washington Heights in a program that provided assistance to older people living at home. Currently, she's the project coordinator for the Palliative Care Project of the Alzheimer's Association in New York City chapter, working extensively with 3 nursing care facilities, Cobble Hill and Jewish Home, to to establish innovative, comprehensive palliative care programs for people with advanced dementia. She has also, in recent years, worked with the Cobble Hill Isabella Collaboration Project concerned with creating more person-centered care environments, and with the United Hospital Fund on their family caregiver project, Next Step in Care. So I turn it over to Lisa, and we look forward to a great presentation.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm going to skip the objectives and we're going to start from the perspective of the person and the family, and then talk some about transitions, and then turn it over to Anne. This was a man that I worked with many years ago. Tommy Thompson was the founder and a musician with Red Clay Ramblers in North Carolina. This was a radio interview, and this was his words. Do I want to be treated? I want to be treated well, just like normal. Alzheimer's isn't my whole life. I want to be included. I am more memory or a diagnosis. I thought I was just one of the ramblers. Or a professor at James Madison University who died after a 13-year course with Alzheimer's. He wrote a wonderful book, but he said, I get tired of asking when or what's going to be, but I don't want to keep my mouth shut all the time. I'll be part of something. People with Alzheimer's actually do wonder how things happen and why. We want to be like they used to be. It's like hell. Being is a big part, and it's a very come-and-go disease. Actually, that's what I'll be talking about. He said, for a little light relief, my little dog takes the edge off. He doesn't talk back or tell you you're crazy. And you can get a feeling from that what people in the early stages are thinking about the impact of the disease on themselves. Another one said, I'd like to help people find meaning instead of just sitting home and disappearing. Alzheimer's is a disease, but it doesn't mean you're dead, no good. And the man who spoke at an early stage Los Angeles forum a number of years ago said, I would lunch with friends, complain about local sports teams, and talk about the same stuff they do. So I think what we're dealing with people living with Alzheimer's is that they have the same needs that you and I do, but more difficulty in meeting those needs. And a lot is about fear. Fear of or shame at being embarrassed for making mistakes. There's still a tremendous amount of stigma and discrimination of people with Alzheimer's disease who may be recently diagnosed, but the public image is that everyone with Alzheimer's is in the advanced stage and lives in a nursing home. Many people feel very marginalized or isolated from important networks or friends and family. Most people feel at some point they are losing control. They are losing props to the identity, the part of the identity that's important to them. And then said, my brain gave up, more or less. Voices of the family members say things like this. There's never enough of me or enough of the quality help I need. I can't remember the last time I didn't worry about him. I was in trouble when I knew more about my mom's prescriptions than my own. And I'll never stop feeling anxious when the phone rings, whether that's from mom living alone or from the nursing home facility. To reach a point, sort of like this cartoon, I was taking one day at a time, then several days got together and ambushed me. And one told me it's not the mountains ahead of me, it's the grains of sand in my shoes day after day. So the wear and tear of trying to walk the balancing act in meet your relatives' needs without in a way making them feel badly about it can take a toll on families. We know about Alzheimer's, it's the most common, but certainly not the only form of dementia. It's a clinical diagnosis. It's a very complex illness, multiple causes. It's progressive. That means it's going to get worse over time. It is more than memory loss. And it is, as Henderson pointed out, is extremely variable in symptoms and duration and even day-to-day. I taught the 6 C's of family care. Family care is common, but people dealing with a chronic disability, and this has to be available for the long term, and that's what makes it hard. Complex. Certainly, when you add cognitive decline to any of the multiple promises older people may have, it gets very complex. It's costly not just financially, but we know it takes a toll physically, emotionally, and socially on families who are involved. It involves difficult choices and often precipitates family conflict. This was a sign that is posted in most VAs now because there's a major national effort, not just in the VA system, to get people to recognize and identify and diagnose Alzheimer's disease or related dementias earlier. So these are common early symptoms, repeating questions, and that sort of thing. These are probably familiar to you. But in early dementia, there are certain family concerns that come up frequently. And even if you don't work with people who are in early dementia, it's important to know that they started. They describe it this way. They say he's not himself. He lost his spark. He doesn't start anything. He doesn't seem to care. He can't make decisions, even decisions about what he wants to eat in a restaurant, or to the bank every day because he constantly is worried about where his money is. He stopped traveling. He didn't pay taxes, and he's a CA. Or an hour to drive to the next pharmacy that's very nearby. Or he messes up minor repairs. These things families notice first. But often what they notice isn't noticed by those people who don't see him very often. And so it leads to the words for many family members who are struggling to help the person deal with their early diagnosis, but at the same time their friends are saying, well, he looks fine to me. Concerns. Might follow recipes, won't change your plans, constantly checking, searching, or hoarding things. He wears the same thing every day or eats only sweets. She used to be very concerned about diet. Or the real fear for many families, and it's very realistic, is exploitation. She paid a stranger $1,700 to clean and gutter. This, she does take her medicine. Set her up for a week, and they're either gone in 2 days or none of them are gone. So just because people have medicine in a container, it's marked for Monday, doesn't mean that they know it's Monday or which pill they've taken or haven't taken. The other issue in early stage is managing money. We know executive function is a problem, and executive function means that judgment about money and calculations are very difficult. But families are often waiting for mom to say, oh, yes, I'd love to have help with my private financial stuff, and it just doesn't happen. And we hear from a lot of families who are very concerned about money that no one knows where it went. Their major issue for families is dealing with driving and deciding when and how to help somebody retire from driving. And that's often a devastating decision. For many families, it's devastating for the spouse as well as the person. I've had many spouses tell me, I need him in the driver's seat as much as he wants to be there. It can be very tough, and that's when they often turn to social workers or support groups for help. Going on to moderate stage dementia, that's when families report that the sleep is disturbed. He's up at night looking for a job he hasn't had in years. When I visit my mom's place, she lives alone. It looks like, what's wrong with this picture? Because the food is in the dishwasher and things aren't where they should be. Or sometimes it's the neighbors, bankers, or pharmacists that are complaining or trying to reach the family and saying they think something is wrong. And very often, if they live with the person, but the person is shadowing them, following them even to the bathroom. And that's because the person is very scared in a world that doesn't make sense. She or he is trying to stay close to what I call the person who becomes their prosthetic brain, almost like a prosthetic arm. The man said, my wife reads my reminders, but she doesn't follow them. People treat for quite a while into this disease, but make sense or following directions becomes more difficult. And often families are astonished when the person calls them by the name of someone who is much older or no longer living, or calls them an imposter. Misidentifications are really common in dementia. So mental intention families say, well, I want to keep mom in a familiar surrounding, so I'm going to keep her home and get some help. So they dutifully hire some help, and mom never lets them in the door because mom's last and clearest memory is that she's an adult who takes care of herself. She doesn't see the need for help, and she is inflamed by, literally, by being asked to have help. Around every corner, this was from the last November AARP bulletin. Amy Greer is a freelance writer, but at that time was taking care of her mother and father, and her father had dementia, and she said, my good-natured dad who has Alzheimer's finds it harder and harder to wait for me while I take care of business. She was trying to work full-time from home and juggling her mother's medical needs, her father's Alzheimer's, and in the description that I seem to have misplaced, if you read the article, it's wonderful. There's a wonderful description of the juggling act of the working at home caregiver. And I think we need to start paying more attention to the number of adult children caregivers who are juggling jobs and other care. Other changes, people confabulate. They are not lying, making up stories that are reasonable to them to fill in holes in memory. So when you ask your mom to take a shower that she hasn't taken in a week, she'll say, I showered this morning. Because again, memory is, I'm old, I shower every day, I don't need to be reminded. Forgetting is another big thing, where they keep repeatedly doing the same motor acts, or they get thoughts stuck in their head. So many of you are familiar with the Kleenex routine, the people constantly fold and refold Kleenex. It can also happen with people who live on their own and buy vitamins every day, or bikes every day. They also lose their sensor. That causes disinhibition. They forget what's public versus private behavior. It can be very embarrassing to families and to the person. Delusions are very common, more common than hallucinations where you see or hear things. And the most common delusions leave people being very suspicious. Well, you were suspicious too. They didn't understand how things happened or why things were the way they were. All she knows is that it's gone, you're there, so therefore you must have taken it. And fortunately, one of the saddest delusions, and very common, are delusions of infidelity, probably precipitated in spouses by a real fear of abandonment. Other common things in modern dementia is not recognizing oneself in the mirror. Sometimes the person in the mirror is a friend, and there's no problem. But you go and do home visits, and some people have their mirrors covered because the person in the mirror is seen as someone scary to the person living with diagnosis. And certainly changes in social relationships, visual motor skills that lead to problems with falls and balance. His daughter said, it's not that she can't dress herself, it's that she won't let me help. That's what makes dementia so difficult for families and for direct care staff. Each dresses for church in 3 shirts, a hat, and panties. So how can social workers prepare the person with dementia? If you happen to work with people early in the course of their diagnosis, remind them of certain things. They're going to have days when things are easier. They will always retain some skills, some knowledge, and they always have the capacity to enjoy life. And that's what we want to make clear. There is a potential for quality of life regardless of the stage of illness. Remind the person to ask for reminders and reassurance that it's okay to give himself extra time and avoid rushing because it's frustrating and causes mistakes. You remind the person not to waste energy trying to keep secrets about their memory loss because cognitive fatigue is real. People are tired from thinking and remembering and trying to keep it all straight, and they do need more breaks. And we always encourage people to rely on trusted family and friends, particularly with money early and medication early. Reminders for the family of the person. I tell families the person is not unhappy or upset because of what you've done necessarily. It's living with unwanted dependency. No one wants to be dependent. Everyone wants to have a way to be a participating, giving member of their family. People with chronic illness who are frustrated by their dependency are going to get out on those who are closest. And unfortunately, that's usually the most well-intentioned family. But what's best for a family often involves compromise among competing needs, loyalties, and commitments. I want to remind you the power of pleasant events. Pleasant events method is an evidence-based alternative to just telling families you need to take care of yourself. Basically, you get families to make a list of things they enjoy doing by themselves or with the person, and you figure out ways that they can increase the frequency and the time they spend doing things that they enjoy. And that's actually a very effective behavioral activation strategy for people with mild depression, which many family caregivers have. It's personalized, it's dignified, and it's purposive. What do they need from social workers? They need a family and person-centered information. They don't need to know everything about Alzheimer's. What they should know is why their mother won't take a bath, or why their mother is so suspicious and accusing of them. They need additional support and acknowledgement that those decisions are hard. They need compassion for the fact that they're going to be imperfect and they're dealing with uncertainty. They need help with their feelings of failure, their feelings of loss of control over what happens to the person, and their feelings of guilt for what they either did or didn't do, even with the best of intentions. And really, from social workers, they need a fresh perspective, an appraisal of their options, with adaptation or coping, and teaching people about problem solving can be really helpful. What is that many families resist referrals that are appropriate to community services, often because they're denying the progression of the illness or because they're being asked to make too many changes at once, because they're afraid of losing control of their relative, because of their fear of the cost. And also, surprisingly, many families are really afraid of the overwhelming disclosure in an assessment and some privacy issues that they feel strongly about. The transitions in care that cause families to seek help from social workers, first, when the event or a change in the person, she's not self-trigger recognition or a need for a diagnosis. Next, when there are changes, usually in handling money, in alcohol, in driving, in travel, or in medication management. Those are the things people notice fairly early on. Then the fee changes, particularly for exploitation that affects live-alone. And then the treatment decisions, hospitalizations, surgeries, determining the person's capacity to state preferences even if they have a health care power of attorney. The next big transition is if something happens to the caregiver. Another big transition is when the person needs continuous 24/7 supervision when they can't be left alone and families need respite or time out. Or a person they have a request antipsychotics or sleep medications, or the place requesting it for the person. And he moves to residential or skilled nursing care and palliative or hospice care needs, which probably should be addressed earlier. But for families, that one is a fortune teller. And sometimes they do this so long that they actually scare themselves. One said, I'm becoming someone scary, I'm not sure what I might do to him. That's a family crying out for help that really does need relief from the constant 24/7 vigilance. But there are decision-making hazards for many families. They take good decisions in a period of unrelenting crises. Often they're dealing with old promises. I'll never put you in a place like that. They're often chasing the ghost of the person as he or she was. You know, and those are women that say, well, I'd love to have my husband try an adult day center, but he makes the decisions in the family and he doesn't want to go. And in my clinical experience in 40 years, I never had anyone with Alzheimer's disease say, oh, yes, I would love to go to an adult day center. It doesn't happen. So we have to help families learn why and how to accept services. Often different family members have different perceptions or expectations of the primary caregiver or of services. Certainly too few good choices for families in making decisions. But at some point, most families say she doesn't belong in a nursing home. So what they're looking for is something that's more home-like. And this is a joke slide I made up to remind myself that people often make decisions about residential care on the basis of the chandeliers and amenities, and they need social work assistance in how to choose the best place for their relative at that time. They're long-term care, but they don't know what's home-like. They don't know what would look home-like to mom at this point in her illness progression. Also wanted to point out to you that there's a wonderful, go to this website of the Alzheimer's Association. You want to know how to start a person-centered assessment. These are the things that you would like to know about the person in order to help them and their family adjust to a new setting. And end with a quote. I worked with a son who was a high school English teacher. His mother lived with Alzheimer's for 10 years in her own home. Her 3 adult sons and grandchildren and 8 aides helped keep her there. She, too, was an English teacher. And he recorded her moments of lucidity, which, despite being generally mute, happened often. This was one of those quotes that gathered around her bed, assuming she was dying from an acute medical illness, and she didn't. And so years before her death, this woman saw her children all gathered around her bed, was so excited to see them. She got up off her pillow and she said, I tell you, this is a Southern woman. I love y'all, and we're going to keep on loving y'all as long as we can. What's good, y'all, is you catch on. You know, and you know it's not going to be perfect. And I think this woman, even though she was very long in her disease process, did have a moment of tremendous insight. Her son felt the same way. And catching those moments of lucidity without assuming that the diagnosis was wrong can be very helpful to many families. And at this point, I would like to turn it over to my friend Ann Wyatt to take on the more advanced stages of the disease.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That was great. My section. I'm going to talk a little bit about the advanced stages of Alzheimer's, and in particular, just sort of remind us all that the average time from diagnosis to death is about 8 to 10 years, and actually 40% of that time can be in the advanced stages as a rule, on average. And of this group of people, 75% will spend some time in a nursing home. So certainly for those folks who work in nursing homes, the advanced stage is going to be the primary contact they have with people with dementia, although, of course, there are people at earlier stages in nursing homes. Either they came in with something else or they did indeed at an earlier stage for one reason or another. We started our program based on the work of Beatitudes camps in Phoenix, Arizona. The chapter was really asked to take a look at what good practices were out there so that we could find a way to work more effectively with the, in fact, more than 160 nursing homes in the metropolitan area. And we did visit at Beatitudes and found that what they've done, they start with the premise that behavior is communication, which of course is something that we all start with. But what they did in exploring this more deeply is really come up with a variety of organizational adaptations to help them be more responsive to people with advanced dementia. So working with them, we are using them as our educators with these 3 homes. It's a third project. We started in July 2012, and we're working with 3 homes: Isabella Geriatric Center, Cobble Hill Healthcare Facility, and Jewish Home Lair in Manhattan. And the reason, as I said, that we chose Beatitudes as the basis for this work is, first of all, that everything that they've done, they've really based it around the notion of behavior as communication. They have wonderful materials and around training in dementia care and also training in end-of-life care. As you all know, even though nursing homes, of course, are where many people die, the truth is that many years ago, nursing homes tended to send people to the hospital when they got near death. So it's been a kind of slower process for nursing homes to really get skilled in end-of-life care and palliative care. Beatitudes also developed a number of specific care practices that bring active comfort to people. The Beatitudes has a very strong link to hospice programs and use hospice programs in their nursing home. They, as I said, really their care practices are really very involved in bringing active comfort, and the organizational adaptations they made in order to make this possible has been key. Comfort First, which is the program that Beatitudes developed, refers not only to the specific care practices but also to the processes by which these practices are implemented. First of all, it's quite essential that it's about listening to residents, to families, and to staff at all disciplines and all levels. And as you know, people with dementia change from one day to the next, so that listening never really stops. In nursing home setting in particular, although this is certainly true in other settings as well, it's about getting to the root of things. It's about asking everyone, the family, the nursing assistants, the nurses, the housekeepers, activities, rehab, social workers, doctors, dietary staff, to be detectives, to find out what distress the resident and we do to eliminate the distress, and also be willing to try out new, sometimes very different ideas. The main task then is really to understand when somebody is in distress, what is the unmet need that is causing the distress for the person. So it may well be pain. It's very important in this context that facilities use, in addition to their other pain tools, that they'll have behavior-based assessment tools, because this helps staff identify pain for people who are no longer able to say, I have pain. It's also really important in terms of food. One of the things that they've done at Beatitudes is they make food available all day, actually 24 hours a day, but the sort of difference is that they offer it around about every 45 minutes from early in the morning until late at night. And it's finger food, it's food people like, and they really have taken up where the American Dietetic Society and the American Diabetes Society leave off. They have statements basically saying that in the nursing home setting, large special diets are not helpful, that in fact the bigger problem in the nursing home setting is malnutrition, and that it's more important that people eat and that for that reason you really want to give them food like, whether it's ice cream, pudding, orange slices, cookies, pieces of chocolate or whatever, because you're not so concerned when someone's in the advanced stage with the potential impact of the disease process in 5 years. It's more important that the nourishment now. Meaningful engagement for advanced dementia means really redefining activities. Activities is, a 5-minute exchange with somebody, even if it doesn't make sense to the casual observer, but if there's a meaningful connection between you and another person. It means that everybody on the floor, whether it's a nurse, a nursing assistant, a housekeeper, whoever is on the floor, that becomes part of their daily effort to have these kinds of exchanges with people. One of the facilities we're working with, when they make a snack, an activity every afternoon, and it's become a real social hour. And are endless varieties of things you can do, but they're going to be small, usually brief encounters. Large group activities don't work so well. But again, the key is always, is the person enjoying it? Are they asleep or are they in distress? And if they're in distress, then that's a clear signal that probably in most cases that they're overstimulated, because as Lisa said clearly, it's very tiring and exhausting to be cognitively impaired, and you can get on overload very easily. Sleep and rest is another area in terms of advanced dementia that very often people really do need to nap during the day because they are on cognitive overload. And at a certain point in the disease process later on, the idea that you keep people up all day so they'll sleep at night kind of tends to bring. That is to say, by the time they get to the evening, they're pretty fried, and it's harder to sleep. So rest during the yes.
Just for a moment. I'm sorry. Would you like to advance the slides, or would you like me?
I'm sorry, I completely forgot. I'm looking
That's
at.
Okay.
Thank you.
I've been advancing the slides.
All right.
Well, I completely forgot.
I'm
looking at another place for them. Okay. Sleep and rest is a really important factor here because we do need to rest during the day, and also sometimes have unusual sleep patterns that are the pattern of a lifetime. And if it does happen to fit into nursing home life, and we had a wonderful example with a man who he had been a doorman, and he had been in other nursing homes. He'd been asked to leave. He'd been refused admission to some nursing homes. He'd spent some time in psychiatric facilities because he was combative when people tried to get him up and when they tried to get him to go to sleep. And the nursing home where he is now figured out that they really, they talked to his wife and discovered that his pattern had always been stay up until 4 a.m, have something to eat, and then sleep until about noon. Once they adjusted the nursing home schedule, virtually all of that combative behavior disappeared. He just wasn't able to shift his pattern, and so the nursing home shifted there, and now he's quite comfortable. This has been going on for over a year, and as his wife said, I feel like I got my life back and I got my husband back. On the other hand, there are people whose sleep patterns may change, and one of the things you don't want to do is wake up people out of a sound sleep, because that's often an occasion when people will reject care because they're completely confused and exhausted. The dementia as a potential area for overstimulation is constantly, an area that needs to be looked at. For example, overhead paging can be very disconcerting. It can be disconcerting if you don't have dementia, but it can certainly be disconcerting when you don't really understand where that voice is coming, never mind what it says. Television sets that are going all the time are not helpful. And if there is a particular television program that people really are watching and will watch, that's one thing. But leaving it on as a sort of constant background noise can be overstimulating. One of the things that happened to Beatitudes was when they started taking a look at the noise and mayhem that tended to happen in late afternoon, typical sundown, they realized that the TV was going, change was happening. There was a lot of confusion, and they asked the staff really to watch residents during this entire 2 o'clock to 7 o'clock time period, and they gradually took the out of the day room. They turned around so they now have a virtually side shift change. They let people rest during the day, and as a consequence, they've literally eliminated sundowning completely because of all these overstimulations, which are really turning out to be the cause. It's also really important to help families understand that dementia is a terminal disease, which is something that a lot of people don't. So as they begin to face some of the decisions they have to make about whether it's antibiotics or hospitalizations or feeding tubes, that they understand it in the context that the person does have a terminal disease, and that's something which people often don't, unfortunately. The other piece of this is that whether people go to or whether they do palliative care in the facility, either way, there are active things that people can do to make their relative more comfortable. And I think that's a really, really, really important concept, because so often people assume that hospice or palliative care means giving up, there's nothing to be done, when in fact, as Lisa said, the really important thing is that you want to find out those things that give pleasure and give comfort. And there are many things, even in the very latest stages of dementia, can do this. And by helping families connect with this, they can feel actively engaged in bringing that comfort to their relative. This wonderful guide, the Encouraging Comfort Care Guide, which was developed by the Illinois chapter of the Alzheimer's Association, they based it on the Beatitudes work and Beatitudes and their partner Hospice of the Valley. And I cannot recommend it strongly enough, because it really carefully lays out all the issues in advanced dementia and helps families really understand the kinds of decisions they may face. And in a very gentle way, it makes clear the limitations of feeding tube and the risk-fit factor in terms of that it often will bring more pain than and certainly than any kind of life, and it talks in the same way about hospitalization, about antibiotics. It certainly is very clear about letting people make the decision that is most consistent with what they're comfortable with or what their relatives' preferences were, but at the same time it helps family understand the limitations of some of these things that are so often associated with extending life. One of the big findings that we had with our project, and I'm so thrilled, Bob, to be able to go on about this a bit, that is that the MDS really can be helpful in focusing in on areas. Of course, it's about knowing the residents. It's all about using the information. One of the things that we've encountered in our efforts is that the more recent F tags of knowing when somebody prefers to get up or when they want to go to bed, for example, have been assigned to staff, but they tend to fill it out and then it gets put in the chart, but it never makes it to the care plan. So it's really important that we collect information about somebody, that we pull it together, and that goes as soon as possible into the care plan, because that makes a big difference, obviously. And unfortunately, one of the things that tends to happen, and my years in nursing home life have taught me how compartmentalized things can be, that it's really important that we pull these pieces together and that we use the information. When somebody likes to get up and when they like to go to bed and what they like to eat are really important considerations in terms of their comfort and also in terms of preventing unnecessary pain and suffering. There are some questions on the MDS, specifically having to do with rejection of care, one having to do with physical aggressiveness, another with aggressiveness. And any time in a care plan meeting when you're looking at somebody's MDS and one of these things is checked off, it's really important to dig down to find out what's going on for this person. we discovered in our work that these things were all often checked out, and the assumption was, well, that's just the way Mr. Jones is, or that's just the way Mrs. Smith is, when in fact, if you dug more deeply, it was things like this person who really wanted to stay up until 4 in the morning, have a sandwich, and sleep till noon, that if you could really get to the bottom of what was causing the distress, if we were really listening to the person's message in terms of their behavior, we could make adjustments in the care plan, and then the rejection of care factor disappeared. It always means the person is in distress. Sometimes it can be, of course, very difficult to figure out, but it's really important to try to do that. And sometimes it is because the caregiver is going too fast, and the resident really can't follow what's happening, and so they get upset because it's just they're a little overwhelmed. One of the things they say to us at Beatitudes all the time is people think that we in Arizona go slow, and of course they're talking to a bunch of New Yorkers, but in fact when we started we realized we were going too fast a lot of the time, and that just slowing down helped enormously. Sometimes showing them what you want them to do, whether you're brushing your teeth or putting on a sweater, something that can be helpful. Sometimes rejection of care happens because the person is hurting in some way. Maybe as a recent example was that an aide was having difficulty helping someone get dressed, and so the educator came to help her, and everything went fine until it was time to put on the sweater, when the resident really got upset. And it turned out she had an old shoulder injury that nobody had known about, and once they realized that, then they could proceed differently. Sometimes people aren't fully awake. I work closely also with Dan Cohen and the Music and Memory iPod Project, and he did with a home in New England a little study about AM care, in which they got people's favorite music and iPods together, and if an aide went in to provide AM care and the person didn't seem to be ready, the aide would leave them with their iPod and let them listen to music for a little while and come back, and they said their experience was they eliminated resistance to AM care. People just weren't quite ready first thing in the morning to be what I suspect was their experience was that they were being a little manhandled. The music helped relax them, and then it was very easy after that. Again, these things aren't always going to work this easily, but they're all clues that we really need to dig in and see what's going on. So it's very common, certainly, for people with dementia to convey signs of distress. Rejection of care is always, the message is always that somebody is in distress, whether it's physical pain or psychic pain or just feeling overwhelmed. And if you make these kinds of changes, once again, one of the things that I heard a lot of complaints about when we started this project was the care plan process is not very individualized. There's really not much that happens at these meetings. And of course, for the person with dementia, if somebody only likes to wear the color pink, that belongs in the care plan, because someone who is not accustomed to working with them isn't going to know that, and is going to have a battle if they try to put a blue sweater on them. If this, what I mentioned earlier, if they're not accustomed to working with him and they try to get him up at 8 o'clock when he hasn't gone to bed till 4, they will certainly have a problem. And so one of the issues is really getting these things into care plan, because these things really matter. If someone doesn't get along with another resident, that belongs in the care plan, because this is really what helps guide folks that are caring for someone clearly to be as responsive as possible. Is that it is as important to know what brings comfort as it is to know what causes distress. And one of our facilities has actually developed a kind of an addendum to the care plan process, which they call What Comforts Me, and they really try to dig down and find out the things that somebody enjoys, somebody that or that just seems to comfort somebody, whether it's chocolates or holding hands and walking up and down the hall. In a few cases, baby dolls have been very, very helpful. It's very individual. You really have to pay attention to that, but it makes a big difference. And again, this is picking up on something that Lisa talked about earlier. In terms of information, this is, I understand totally that this is a huge challenge. But one of the things that I've noticed, again, in this work is a lot of history information on residents that used to be collected has kind of gone by the wayside. And so it's really important. I'm not talking about 2 or 3 pages of data and information that nobody's going to look at. On the other hand, you really do need to have a sense of who this person is and of what their life's been and what their comforts are and what their upsets may be, so that you can build it into the care plan. And the other issue is then, once you've done this, is it accessible to the nursing assistants? Is it accessible to the people that really need to have this information in a day-to-day way? And unfortunately, too often, it isn't, and that's something which needs to be really looked at. So what is the information that's going to be helpful? Who collects it, and who gets to see it, and where is it kept so that it can be easily updated? The person who only wears pink may change their mind along the way, and it's really important to be able to record that so that it's clear to people. It's also who needs to know and how do they find out. It's certainly in terms of staff on the unit. It's also different disciplines and different roles on the unit, different shifts, visiting staff, weekend staff, supervisors, and managers. It's really critical that when we think about what information is important, we also think about who's to know it and how are we going to reach these people so that they find this out. Change, the dialogue needs to keep going because people's levels of comfort and distress change all the time. One of the things that we noticed in our work is that while once upon a time it used to be very common to provide regular dementia training in the nursing home setting, that at least for our facilities that it had stopped happening. I think everybody kind of got caught up in short-term rehab, and somehow dementia kind of slid out of the room a little bit. And so consequently, we had people being assigned to the dementia floors, or to floors, since most people with dementia in a nursing home are not on a dementia unit, even if they're a dementia unit, that it's really important that everybody in the facility have access to good education and training, and that needs to be ongoing. Also needs to be ongoing dementia cooperative. And one of the sort of relatively simple things you can do, get information in your facility on who you have in the facility who is rejecting care or who is physically or verbally aggressive, and that will help you understand where you need to focus your efforts, so that those questions are helpful on an individual basis in care planning, but they can also be helpful on cooperative efforts. And so once again, I want to say a huge thank you to the MDS for speeding along. Even when somebody may have had some general ongoing dementia training, if they're going to go on to a unit with a lot of folks with dementia, you really need to make sure that they're oriented to how things are handled on that week. We all recommend, especially, I think this would be good on any nursing home unit, but and our 3 projects our 3 homes have for the last 18 months had weekly meetings for just about a half hour on the dementia units to really look at what's going on, if they're trying a new project, or for example, when they started introducing different kind of snack program, just to see how it's going on. Is the food coming up? Is it the food asked for? Are people eating it? One of the things we discovered was that pound cake was good, spot cake was no. And they also, an early victory in one of our homes was that the cookies that were coming up were too crunchy, and residents didn't really eat them, so they won a huge victory when they went over to soft cookies. Those are the things. Again, these are just half-hour meetings, but they've been doing it for 18 months, and now I don't think any of them would give it up. It was important that all the disciplines be available to this. Of course, care planning that includes CNAs is extremely important, and also the care planning that includes comfort and trigger details is extremely important. And our job is to set the example, to listen to what everybody is saying, and to hear those little clues that you can get from staff. We had the experience early on in one of our facilities where one of the weekly meetings, there was an aide who came to the meetings, but she didn't really talk a lot. And at the end of one of the sessions, the conductor of the meeting said, there happened to be a social worker, and he said, is there anything anybody else wants to say? And this older aide said, well, I have something I want to say. She had been listening at the training about this idea of people being tired during the day. I took Mr. Smith and Miss Jones back to bed after lunch, and they were really able to rest. And I understand that they're doing fine at night. And the nurse, shock, turned to her and said, no wonder it's been so quiet in the afternoons. I hadn't really quite connected the fact that there'd been this change of mood and atmosphere. There had been. So it's really important to ask these questions, listen, and affirm them. To be workers, certainly to participate as a detective, and also to help both in care plan discussions and group discussions, making sure that everybody gets to participate using our group work skills. Promote sensible, coherent information sharing. I know this is an old problem in nursing homes, and it goes on. Sometimes it seems forever, but it is really important that we figure out what do we need to know, who needs to know it, and are we making sure they get that information. And then finally, certainly educating families to understanding the later stages of disease and what are some of the considerations. And that's really all. Thank you.
Very much, Anne and Lisa, for an excellent presentation. I'm inviting people in the audience to please type in a question, or if you don't have a question but you'd like to get some feedback on today's session or any comments that have been inspired by today's session, to go ahead and do that. Please type it in the Q&A box or in the chat box if that's easier for you. This presentation has been saved as 6 slides per page, and it's available on the website, and you see the URL in front of you. And in addition to that, our speakers have put together a very nice resource list, and so that is also on the website. And I'm just going to, I'm showing you what the first page of it looks like right here, and you can scroll down on your own screen to see the rest of it. But it's a page, well, actually about a 4-page resource list. Some of these resources you can use to develop a staff training if you'd like to do that. And also some of these would be particularly useful to share with families who may be struggling with understanding and accepting the disease and where the nursing home resident might be. A few comments that are coming in. Thank you. I've enjoyed this webinar. Thanks for all the information. Ramona says, very informative. And Julie saying, very good patient. I'm glad I took the time to listen. Thanks so much. People are saying it was very helpful. Somebody did have a question about what, use the term palliative care a few times. What do you mean by palliative care?
Well, that's a great question and straightforward, but also a little bit complicated. Palliative care means that and this can be, palliative care can be for somebody who has a terminal illness or somebody who has a chronic illness that is not necessarily terminal at all, but it means that you're really looking to help the person make decisions in the context of what gives them, what makes them comfortable. So that sometimes and just one example, this isn't a dementia example specifically, but for certain kinds of illnesses, there may be a lot of pain attached to it, and people make different decisions about how much pain medication they want based on what else they want to accomplish in their life and their own tolerance for it. So palliative care would say that it's really important to work with the person to come up with a solution that they're most comfortable with and that they can live with. Arthritis, you don't have to have a terminal illness to be in pain. Arthritis can cause you a lot, and people make different decisions about how much pain they can tolerate. Just as one example. For the person with advanced dementia, palliative care means that you are really looking not only at the progression, the technical progression of the disease, but are they comfortable. And so the treatment of pain, or the identification and treatment of pain for somebody with advanced dementia, is really important, and the usual pain scales don't often miss that. It's one of the reasons why antipsychotics are often too often overused. It's because the agitation is assumed to be some natural outcome of the dementia, when in fact the agitation may well be, for example, traceable back to pain, and that if the pain, the agitation goes away. On the other hand, if you use an antipsychotic to treat it, the pain doesn't go away. The person may not be able to express it, but that pain is going to stay with them. So it's really important to really get to the root of what somebody's discomfort is. And so in the context of advanced dementia, palliative care really means finding out what's going on for the person if they're in any kind of distress.
There was another question saying that there are some challenges in trying to engage men with dementia, that some of the activities available are targeted toward women residents, but not so many for men. And in your experience, what activities have you found to successfully engage men with dementia?
Lisa, you want to start with that?
I can start it out anyway. That again, it's more person-centered than gender-centered.
Mm-hmm.
Some men love music at any stage of the illness. Men like something to do, something to put together, something to take apart, something to fiddle with in some way. And sometimes finding that out might make a difference. Some I found really like identity props rather than activities. One of where they're, do baseball hat or something like that. If they're wearing the team hat or the team sweatshirt, feel more like themselves, and they participate more. Some will like to watch sports. Some like to watch Nature Channel. Some people want to have some project that they can work on. And some men like to do fairly routine but dignified adult activities around cleaning or around helping someone else. One of the things we forget is that even with advanced dementia, need to feel that they can give as well as receive. And I've seen some very impaired men who are able to establish really lovely relationships with other people on a unit. They really felt they were helping that person, and they may have been physically. But to provide the right environment for those relationships to happen can be really helpful. So I think it just depends. Some men like to, watch a bird feeder or feed the birds. Some men like to be outside more. Men like some variation of golf. Or some kind of game. Some people like tossing a big ball. There are a variety of activities, but they tend to be activities that people do in smaller groups than a lot of facilities are set up for.
Yeah, I would really score that certainly all is things true for people in the later stages as well, and that the important thing to really, it's less about gender and more about, who has this person been in their life. We were discussing recently somebody who really didn't come into the dining room much, and there's kind of an automatic assumption that he was asocial, but which of course is problematic because there are all life people that are not big group people, and yet unfortunately a lot of activities tend to be targeted to that, and that gets more complicated as people's dementia advances, and it's harder to be responsive to a large number of people. This man, when he dug into it, of course, it turned out that he had been he was certainly accustomed to being around lots of other people, but he just preferred being on his own, and he loved jazz, and he loved classical music. So we fitted up with an iPod after finding out a little more about what kinds of jazz and classical music, and he was as happy as could be. So it's really important to find out what gave people pleasure in the past. It's not always going to be the solution, but it's going to help enormously to know more about what kind of life did they live before.
I like the idea ideas that you've been sharing, and in particular, one idea that was mentioned in terms of helping to get nursing home residents or people in assisted living outside. Mm-hmm. Something as basic as that. I know here in the Midwest, we're an outside culture for the most part, and so being outside, feeling the wind, feeling a little bit of the sun can help people feel more like themselves and more at home. But with so many nursing homes challenged by being short-staffed, that can be an issue. But maybe that's something a volunteer could be doing, taking maybe one or two or at most three people outside, just to have them sit outside a little bit if that works out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I was collecting data in a nursing home one time, and this is Mercity. Oh, I'm some feedback from someone. And a man with quite moderate dementia, I asked him what would he like to do, and he said he'd like to mix up some scent. Really surprised me. Well, the following week, the nursing home had scheduled to put up new flower planters, and so I mentioned it to the activities person, and she made sure that he was outside, kind of supervising, but also holding some of the tools and just being part of the smells and the sounds of using cement. So it's those connections
Perfect.
with things that were important to people at other times in their life.
That's perfect.
This is Bob. I had a question. Ann, thank you for that update on use of the MDS, because it really is an instrument that was attempted to be designed to be as clinical as possible, and this is a window that I don't think there's been a lot of work on. But I guess what I wondered, when you do have someone who's resisting care or has the other items that you described, how do you get the aide to feel confident to be looking into it when you kind of know how to get to the core problem, and perhaps it's a behavior problem or a psych problem or something that's more out of the realm of the team to resolve?
Well, at Attitudes, they have people who have been turned away from under the nursing homes, have been rejected by them and whatnot. They have they have a tough group, I should say. At least they were theoretically tough, and Attitudes took the approach that there was a root cause for everybody. It does, some of them a lot harder to get to than others, and I don't want to minimize that. But at the same time, everybody needs to be involved in that exploration process. We'll find from very good experienced aides often, they'll say, but how to care for her, that's just the way she is. The fact that she fights me every time I give her a shower. Well, the truth of the matter is, as managers, we have been expecting her to give that shower regardless, low on 20, 30 years. So part of the responsibility here is really for managers and other disciplines to support the idea that we all have to dig into this together, and that we may miss the first, we're not always going to get it right, and certainly not at the beginning necessarily, although sometimes we will. But that if you start to believe there is a root cause that can be addressed, that begins to change the picture right off the bat. It's often hard for experienced aides to go there right away because we have, in effect, tolerated the idea, not willfully, not because we liked it, but the idea that people will get kicked and scratched and spit upon. This is for their daily life, most aides who care for people with dementia. So the idea that it can be tough for them to get past that because it's never been part of what the expectations were. We have to help with that. We all have to be on the hunt to finding what those root causes are. But Beatitudes will tell you, that what they did at those weekly meetings was they just stuck to it, and some people it was a lot easier to figure out than others. One woman, when I was out there the first time, she had been a particularly challenging situation when she first came and would make no eye contact and really was very just a lot of the time. But they slowly worked on it. Her kisses were part of it. Also, she had been a nurse, and she had 5 kids, and she was somebody who they tried a baby doll with, and that was a huge comfort to her. And then at some point, they figured out to set her up in the nursing station so she could write notes. I saw this lady with my own eyes, and she was comfortable. The only way I can describe it, or the clearest way I can describe it. So again, I don't ever want to say that it's simple, but I do think that if you believe that there is something causing the distress, and you're going to stick with it, but it's everybody in that process, not just the nursing assistant.
About is a real culture change and getting out of silos and really looking differently. How's it working in the 3 other New York facilities? Because I know they're trying to embrace this, and yet not all in the same place.
Slow and steady, the man who they figured out, went to bed at 4 and had a sandwich and got up at noon was in New York City. He was one of these homes. Certainly the identification and treatment of pain, everybody has gotten a lot more sensitive to it. This idea that people will get Tylenol, PRN, which is, we like to say here is patient receives none. If somebody's in pain, they're in pain, and it's rarely the case certainly they're not going to ask for it if they have advanced dementia. That's just not going to happen. So it's really taking a fresh look at pain programs, making sure that you have a tool. The Pain Ed is one tool, but there are others, which are behavior-based to help staff recognize signs of pain. Somebody stiffening up. I had this conversation with an aide recently. She said, well, I don't think she's in pain, but every morning when I come to her, she holds her body really tightly. Well, that's just what I do when I go to the dentist. It's like you're expecting trouble, and you probably are going to get it in the sense that you. And also, by the way, one of the things that we've been counseled about is that you don't say, "Are you in pain?" You may ask somebody if this, that, or the other. Does your arm hurt, or does this sore, or other words which people are more accustomed to. But there are those behavior-based pain assessment forms are really important, and of course you can use them at home too. You don't have to be in a nursing home, but they're really helpful in terms of really helping the staff pin down that it probably is pain. If you can't find any other reason for the distress, one of the things they do at Beatitudes is try. First of all, they try non-pharmacological intervention, and if those don't work, they will try low levels and sometimes successively raising them of medication, and very often that's what makes the difference for the person.
Very helpful. If there are any other questions or comments, please type them in. And just as a reminder, today's session is being recorded. I usually like to have the recording up within 24 hours, but I might be asking for a little bit more time this time. They'll be up for sure by Monday. A handout that consists of all the slides you saw today is posted on our website, and so is the resource list. So you see the website in blue there in front of you, and that's where you can find this information. Okay, let's see. There's a couple questions that have come in now. Is it beneficial for nursing facility residents with dementia who are in a secure unit to interact with non-dementia residents?
My guess is that the answer depends on the person, but that it's not necessarily a bad thing for sure. It's really about the person's comfort, whether they're in a situation where they're not feeling overwhelmed. So where they get taken down to a larger activity or get to interact with another resident. The clues come from the person and whether or not they're comfortable or feeling overwhelmed in the situation. It's not that there's anything innately troublesome about them connecting with somebody who doesn't have dementia. Probably has more to do with the other person's comfort than the person with dementia. In fact, I often remember years ago a social worker was giving a talk here. She said she was talking about how the affective, stays with people a lot longer than the cognitive, and she said what really struck her about that was that the day before a resident had come up to her and said, "I don't know who you are, but I like you." And she said that made a particularly strong impression because she'd seen the same resident go up to somebody else the week before and say, "I don't know who you are, but I don't like you."
Oh boy, that says volumes. Here's our last question for today. Are there facilities that specialize in dealing with residents with aggression from dementia? I know many facilities will not accept aggressive and combative residents.
I think one of the things that we've learned, and this is certainly based on what Beatitudes has taught us, is that a lot of that aggression doesn't have to be, that it's not aggression, it's defending themselves. They're being hurt in some way. They're in pain. They're uncomfortable. Somebody's really bothering them. And a lot of that so-called aggressiveness is not about aggressiveness. It's about defense. And really it's not to say that there are not, on occasion, people whose behavior is worrying for one reason or another, but of the time, what we're certainly learning is that it has to do with the fact that they're defending themselves against pain or upset in some way, and that our responsibility is to figure that out, and then there's no need for that so-called social care.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa Gwyther and Ann Wyatt and Bob Conley for today's webinar. And I also want to thank the people who were on as participants. Your questions and your comments have been very helpful also. We're going to conclude now, but please stay tuned for upcoming webinars and check the website for our webinars coming up in April. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks.
Oh, you're done.